I shall be away from the island today, Monday, 3rd November 2025, on vacation leave. In accordance with the provisions of Section 2033 of the Constitution, the Very Reverend Dr. Jeffrey Douglas Gibson will perform the functions of the office of the President during my absence. As the Honorable the Senate will not be meeting prior to my departure, it will not be possible for the usual formal message to be sent to your chamber. Will you, therefore, please bring my absence formally to the attention of the Honorable the Senate when next it meets? Signed by Her Excellency the President, State House.
Announcements by your Honor.
Announcements first are minutes. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move the confirmation of the minutes of the following weeks: Tuesday, the 7th of October, 2025, Wednesday, the 15th of October, 2025, and Wednesday, the 22nd of October, 2025. I also beg to move that the minutes of Wednesday, the 29th of October, 2025 be deferred at this time.
The question is that the minutes of our meetings held on Tuesday, October 7th, 2025, Wednesday, October 15th, 2025, and Wednesday, October 22nd, 2025 be confirmed. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against please say no. The next the ayes have it, those minutes are confirmed. The question is that the minutes of our meeting on Wednesday, 29th October 2025 be deferred. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The things the ayes have it, those minutes are accordingly deferred. By way of further announcements, we have excuses for absence from Her Honor Senator Thompson, Senator Paris, Senator Walters, Senator Maladou, and Senator Dr. Rogers. And indications of late arrival from Senator Dr. Drakes, Senator Tate, Senator Mr. Maynard, and Senator Nichols.
Presentation of petitions. Presentation of papers.
Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I'm commanded to lay the following document: Loan Agreement Number 2/854, Urban Renewal Project in the Water, Housing and Infrastructure Sector, Phase 1, between the Saudi Fund for Development and the Government of Barbados.
Reports from select committees. Questions to ministers. Request for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance. Statement by ministers or parliamentary secretaries. Personal explanations. Motions relating to the business or sitting of the Senate are moved by a minister.
Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Order 45-2 for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is Standing Order 45-2 be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The things the ayes have it. Standing Order 45-2 is therefore suspended for the remainder of today's sitting.
Election of bills.
Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move the first reading of the Development Bank of Latin American Caribbean Bill 2025.
First reading. Yeah. First reading.
The question is that the question is that the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean Bill 2025 be read a first time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The next the ayes have it. A bill is accordingly read a first time.
Public business, sir.
Public business is now the order of the day.
So order number 11, in the name of the Honorable Leader of the Senate, but being moved by Senator Dr. the Honorable S.M. Monroe Knight, to move the second reading of the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean Bill 2025.
Senator Dr. the Honorable Chantal Monroe Knight.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, as I begin to lead debate on this bill that would repeal and replace the Latin American Development Bank Act 2025 to provide for Barbados to become a member country of the Latin American Development Bank, and with continued recognition of the Agreement on Immunities, Exemptions, and Privileges. Mr. President, I want to begin by asking all of us, as we would have done, I think, since the last time that we would have met in this honorable chamber, to continue to remember Jamaica. I think that when crisis hit, when devastation hits, we all turn our attention in that particular moment, that devastation. In that particular moment, we empathize, we are all riveted, we listen to all of the stories. But as time moves and our attention shifts to other things that happen in our lives, we tend to forget. Jamaica has a long road ahead of it in terms of its recovery, the trauma at the personal level, and overall, at the macro level, Jamaica needs our continued support and attention. But even as we've paid attention to Jamaica, I also want to indicate that we have devastation in Cuba as well, in Haiti, Mr. President, as well. And it is important that we continue to remember and also, as well, importantly, Mr. President, take the lessons from what happened with the passage of Hurricane Melissa. Hurricane Melissa, a Category 5 hurricane. It was the strongest, but Mr. President, they say not only the strongest hurricane to have hit Jamaica, to have hit the region, it was the strongest Atlantic hurricane on record that behaved most erratically, Mr. President. It sat, it moved, it hit some parts of Jamaica and not the others. And we have always been saying as a government in our discussion around the climate crisis that we all face an existential threat. And certainly one of the things that I asked myself with the passage of Hurricane Melissa and its continued devastation is the what if question. What if it was Barbados? What if it was us? How does a country recover? How do people recover from that level of devastation? It is estimated, Mr. President, that Jamaica will require approximately $4 to $6 billion, $6 billion US for its recovery. I don't know of any government in the region, and I would say elsewhere, that can look straight in its coffers and say immediately as a crisis hits, I have the money that is available and is necessary. While Jamaica requires $4 to $6 billion US dollars, across the region, the estimate suggests it is $48 billion that it will take to provide coverage. Jamaica, Mr. President, had a little bit of a raincoat. A little bit of a raincoat. In 2024, Jamaica would have, through the World Bank, issued a catastrophe bond. And that bond provided Jamaica with a $150 million payout, the full payout of that catastrophe bond. The government had the foresight to create that umbrella for the what-if situation. The what-if situation. And now, Jamaicans are able to benefit from that payout of $150 million. They're also receiving, Mr. President, a payout from the Caribbean a catastrophe risk insurance facility, what we call CRIF. CRIF is going to provide Jamaica with $70.8 million US dollars and another $21.1 million for excess rainfall. But don't forget, Mr. President, I said that the estimated damage is some $6 billion. So those payouts will only cover 2 to 3% of what Jamaica needs to recover. Mr. President, the CRIF facility is an insurance facility. It means that you pay out. We all pay insurance. The what if. We don't want an accident to happen. We don't want our health to be impaired, but we pay for the what if situation. So that when a disaster or something that we don't foresee happens, we have a facility, we have the available capacity to be able to respond to those what if situations. And Mr. President, the bill that we are debating here is also as well part of Barbados's what if. We're not debating alone. What we are debating is investment in a development bank that gives us the long-term potential to be able to access resources for development challenges, and importantly, for the what-if situations. So that when we need resources, that we are able to have resources, Mr. President. It's an investment. Mr. President, we all make choices about how we manage our resources at the household level, how we plan for the what-ifs, how we plan for our own personal development in our families, Mr. President. It is Christmas time. Mr. President, we all want to be able to spruce up the house. We know how we do it, the Bajan way. So some of us might go to the credit union and take out a little bit of a Christmas loan, Mr. President. And we take out that Christmas loan, we look at our circumstances, and we say, I want to make this investment in my property, in making it ready and prepared. But I look and I see the credit union will look and tell us, bring in all of your necessary financials so that we can be sure that you can repay, and on that basis, you can have this envelope. And Mr. President, what we are saying as well is that we understand that the macro fundamentals of our economy are stable, Mr. President, that the fundamentals are stable enough that would allow us to be able to do this investment without in any way jeopardizing our delivery and without in any way putting us at risk, Mr. President. Mr. President, I want to draw your attention, if you would allow me, to the staff report of the International Monetary Fund. Is the IMF Country Report number 25-153, and it reports on the 5th reviews under the extended arrangement under the Extended Fund Facility and arrangements under the Resilience and Sustainability Facility.
Just for the record, I know you give the number, which is useful reference, but could you give the date as well?
Sorry, yes, June 2025.
Thank you.
June
Thank you very
2025, Mr. President, June 2025. And Mr. President, I will not go through the report, but I want to just review what that report said of June 2025 about Barbados's fiscal performance to show up the argument, Mr. President, that we are sure that we can make this investment again because our fundamentals are sure. The report indicates that our primary surplus balance reached Barbados 621 million, or 4.3% of GDP, comfortably exceeding the program target, Mr. President, exceeding the program target, while the overall fiscal balance recorded a deficit of 0.9% of GDP. Revenues significantly outperformed budget projections. Significantly outperformed budget projections, 2.8% of GDP, due to higher corporation tax receipts, resulting again from a combination of higher tax rates for the international companies, new international financial reporting standards, and higher profitability of multinational enterprises, Mr. President. Conservatively, around 1/3 of this overperformance is expected to be permanent, Mr. President. Is expected to be permanent. This is the International Monetary Fund reporting in June 2025 on the macro fundamentals of Barbados. But it also reported, Mr. President, on the outlook and risk. It also reported on the outlook and risk. And it identified two things, primarily, that would jeopardize Barbados's continued upward trajectory. It said, one, external. Additional trade policy and investment shocks. External. Additional trade policy and investment shocks could reduce growth and also tourism demand. Mr. President, I don't think that any Barbadian is not aware that the world is changing, that we have had, again, because of what is happening in some parts of the world, a shift in finances that could be available, in shift in the policy stance that impacts on our ability right here, Mr. President, to be able to access funds. At the recent IMF annual meetings, it was reported, Mr. President, that a statement from one of the members of the International Monetary Fund indicated that the IMF should return to what they call its core missions. And its core missions did not include financing for climate. Its core missions not including financing for climate. So that our ability, therefore, to access necessary funding from traditional agencies, the IMF and the World Bank, is now impeded, again, by an external policy shock. An external policy shock, Mr. President, that we had nothing to do with. And it is based on a hierarchy of an institution in which those that have the most value have the most voice and can therefore exercise authority over policy directives of the institutions. Secondly, it says the second risk is natural disasters that could impact growth and increase the fiscal deficit and public debt. Mr. President, that was the International Monetary Fund. But we know as well, just recently, that the central bank, in its quarterly report, also indicated to us, again, that we have seen growth in our economy. The central bank report, Mr. President, the review of Barbados's economic performance January to September 2025, from resilience to results, powering Barbados forward, is the publication that I'm referring to, Mr. President. And it says, the economy expanded steadily during the first 9 months of 2025, even as global trade tensions continued and growth in several advanced economies slowed. Real GDP increased by 2.7%, led by tourism, agriculture, construction, business, and other services, Mr. President. It said again that the external position remained robust on strong tourism receipts and higher long-term financing. It reported on a stronger fiscal balance and reduced debt ratio during the first half of the fiscal year. Mr. President, it reported on increased receipts in tourism, growth in agriculture, and I say all of this, Mr. President, to demonstrate that as we make investments and that government ensures that we have the necessary financing, particularly in this case, with the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, as we move from Series C shares to Series A shares, allowing us to become full members of the bank. That government does that with the understanding, with the knowledge, and because we have worked to do it, that the economy is growing and that we then are able to balance the investment, which is a long-term investment, Mr. President, against the fact that we are doing well. Mr. President, I said, we all make choices at the individual level, the household level, about what it is that we can go to the bank for, what it is that we can be able to repay. And in this instance, the government has looked also as well at what we can do and what is necessary, Mr. President, the what if. Mr. President, if you're a woman, you would say, Mr. President, we got some vex money. That's how I grew up. I grew up with my father, because my mother wasn't there so much, but my father always used to say, girl, you got vex money. Something in your back pocket just in case something don't work out. And Mr. President, so that we have to look at this investment as a little of that, some little vex money. Some little money that we have to have, some space that we will need in order to be able, like I said, to address those fundamental development challenges. And as we are facing, as was discussed, policy changes externally that we cannot control, but that will have a big impact on us, it requires of us to be able to ensure that we diversify our partnerships and diversify how we access the necessary financing. Mr. President, globally, UNCTAD has indicated, Mr. President, UNCTAD has indicated that financing through aid is on the decline, Mr. President. A 2025 report, Aid at Crossroads, Trends in Development, indicates particularly for Latin America and the Caribbean that we are seeing a downward trend in official development assistance. But where there are increases, it is extremely concentrated. That aid is going to areas specifically in which they are seeing potential for growth, Mr. President. So that aid is going to countries, Dominican Republic, a little bit of Jamaica as well. But what we are seeing is a decline. If the report says that in 2023, ODA remained high but declined in real terms. As such, the global aid target was missed by about almost half. For developing countries, ODA remains an important source of financing, but it has declined for the third consecutive year, Mr. President. Mr. President, that picture is also repeated when we talk about the mobilization of private capital as well. Mobilization of private capital. Private capital that wants to come in already demarcated growth areas. So the leader of government business, Mr. President, would say to you that in the energy sector, we will have heavy investment because that is where private capital wants to come. They see the opportunities in there. They can leverage the opportunities for renewables, Mr. President. For countries that are doing oil and gas, you would see heavy investment in those sectors. But the question is, who then invests in the education? Who invests in the health sector, Mr. President? Who invests in the housing stock? And those are areas where capital is not moving into. So you have, on one hand, for a country like ours, an international policy environment that is hostile. Climate financing is retreating. Aid, development assistance is declining. Private capital mobilization as well is only going into a few sectors. And Mr. President, domestic capital mobilization as well for Barbados and most of the rest of the Caribbean is also nascent. You have a private sector that still will rely very, very heavily on government subsidies and still needs to be developed. So within that environment, government has to be able to look at what are the alternative ways and means and partners that we can work with in order to meet the gap that will be there in our critical development needs and in those what-if situations. The investment in CAF, in this bank, the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, Mr. President, that was initiated in 2014 by the Democratic Labour Party administration with an initial investment, Mr. President, of $50 million US. 50 million. With that level of investment, as Series C shares provides you with access to 4 times the amount that you have put in. So it provided us at that time with access to $200 million from CAF. And I believe, Mr. President, that that administration then would have seen CAF, because CAF is a bank, Mr. President, that is based within the region, the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. A bank, unlike others, that is responsive, knows the context, our context, knows the demands that we have, understands our circumstance, and therefore can develop portfolios of projects and provide financing that adapts specifically to our circumstances. And the administration, I believe at that time, would have seen that investment in CAF as critical to helping Barbados, but also as well an avenue for provision of concessional finance. We have continued, Mr. President, with our involvement in CAF. In 2023, we would have increased our share of those C series shares, Mr. President, by another $50 million. $50 million, allowing us to access now, again, 4 times, Mr. President, the amount to $400 million of access in CAF. But, Mr. President, I want to say that there is something fundamental that we need to recognize about this investment here as government moves to become a full member of CAF with this investment, is that allows us, Mr. President, to sit on the board of directors of CAF. And what does that mean? Unlike in other spaces where we have to take the policy impulses of those who put in more, Barbados now, as a critical shareholder, will then be able to influence decision-making, Mr. President, be able to sit at the table and have a say in the way how CAF operates. So that this investment is not only a monetary investment, Mr. President, but it is allowing us to be able to be directly involved in the governance of a financial institution that is here in the Caribbean. CAF's commitment to Barbados is such that the first regional manager has an office here in Barbados, and the intent is actually to establish an office for CAF, again, right here in Barbados. Suggesting its commitment to Barbados and the Caribbean. CAF's initial development was more attuned, Mr. President, to Latin America. But it made a commitment to deepening its relationship with the Caribbean. And hence, we had a change in the name, moving from Latin America Development Bank, Mr. President, to Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. But, Mr. President, importantly, it is the types of partners that we need, so that the financing that will be available to CAF through our investment is available not only to the public sector, but also as well to the private sector as well. To the private sector, to be able to access it, to finance, again, big projects that we need. So where, Mr. President, like I said, we have a nascent private sector that needs capital. That needs capital. Our participation in this bank allows us then to be able to open up and offer, Mr. President, an opportunity for the private sector to be involved. And Mr. President, at the current level, like I said, we are able to have access to 4 times the amount, right? So we have 100 million in, we're able to access 400 million. The investment, Mr. President, as identified in the first schedule of the bill, and again, Mr. President, it is undoubtedly a large amount. If you look at section 1, Mr. President, I read, the subscriber shall acquire, and this is us as a subscriber, 34,834 registered Series C shares corresponding to the common capital stock of CAF for a value each of $14,200 of the US for a global amount of $494,642,800 US. And Mr. President, anybody will say that that is a large amount. But that large amount, that investment, Mr. President, provides for us, Mr. President, 18 times the amount, Mr. President. 18 times the amount that we put in over 15 years now become accessible to us, Mr. President. So we put in a little tra-la-la. We put in something based on the fact, Mr. President, because our macroeconomic funding, that we can do it, and Mr. President, we then now have access to 18 times the amount. 18 times the amount. And Mr. President, some would say 18 times the amount. So what could we do with this money? What could we do with these resources? Mr. President, I've worked with CAF in 2 areas under the portfolios that I manage. One, water, and also as well for culture. And what I have found with CAF, again, and I've worked with a number of development partners. Development partners sometimes have preconceived notions of what it is that you need. So they come in, Mr. President, to tell you, these are the problems. I've done my diagnostic, and I'm going to give you some funds to address these problems that we know that you have. When CAF comes in, Mr. President, the approach is different. CAF comes in to say, tell me what are the problems you want us to work together on. CAF comes in to say, let's co-create together the solution going forward. CAF comes in to say, tell me what you need, and let us see how we can work with you. So what we are doing, Mr. President, is opening up financing, and not just any type of financing, but financing that is flexible and financing that is responsive, but also financing that is available sometimes in areas that other traditional partners don't want to go, Mr. President. And it is not only financing, but also technical assistance. Again, because when we talk about the bank, immediately we go to loans, Mr. President, we want to borrow more money. But CAF also provides significant technical assistance in critical areas. And again, I go to the Barbados Water Authority. We've talked a lot about, of course, the investment that CAF is doing in our roads, in the water infrastructure, particularly on the South Coast. But CAF is doing more than that. Mr. President, I met with the regional director for CAF, and she said, tell us, what does the Water Authority need? And I said, Mr. President, you know, outside of money, financial resources, we need to build some capacity within our systems. One of the major issues that we have is the issue of non-revenue water. We're losing a lot of water. We don't know how to be able to account for it, where the leaks are happening. We need to be able to strengthen our capacity to do that level of analysis. Mr. President, she said, okay, I'm going to go away and think about it and then come back to you. Mr. President, within a week and a half, I tell you, no lie, no joke, I was able to get a call that said, listen, CAF is going to make available $700,000 US in technical assistance to be able to provide the Barbados Water Authority with technical expertise that will sit beside its managers, its engineers, and look at coming up with solutions for how you address the challenge on non-revenue water, Mr. President, within a week and a half. And that assistance, Mr. President, has yielded a plan for the Barbados Water Authority that we are in the process of implementing in order to be able to ensure that we can address that challenge. That is the responsiveness of this bank that we are talking about. That is the nature of a bank that is for the region and in the region. That is the nature of the assistance that we are able to receive from our investment in this bank. On point, on time, and directly responsive to the need identified. Not coming from outside, but us telling them and they responding, Mr. President. CAF has moved on in the water sector to open up a regional facility for the development of a master plan for Caribbean countries and how to build water resilience again, offering, Mr. President, technical support to advance that agenda. And so I emphasize this point because, again, whereas traditional lenders, we go to those banks, and yes, we're able to get resources. Very often, the on-time and on-demand technical resources that we need are not there. CAF offers that. CAF, as well in its operations, offers the ability to assist member countries with mobilizing and catalyzing private finance, Mr. President. Private finance that perhaps will not automatically come to us because they don't see the advantage, because we need to be able, Mr. President, to de-risk our finance. CAF is able to work as that interlocutor for us, attracting that capital and then moving it in, acting as a broker for us in order to be able to get the necessary finance. CAF does that. The Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. CAF provides that facility. And I've talked about before its ability as well to be able to be open to private sector investment. But I've also worked with CAF, Mr. President, in the area of culture, As part of CARIFESTA, CAF, not alone, Mr. President, a grant provided $225,000 US, Mr. President, to assist us with CARIFESTA, allowing us to be able to mobilize and assist delegations that might not have had the financial means to attend, but who were important to making sure that CARIFESTA was really and truly Caribbean. Those resources as well would have allowed us to be able to do the necessary outreach, Mr. President, for our public relations. It would have provided resources for infrastructure as well for CARIFESTA. But outside of CARIFESTA, Mr. President, CAF in February, the agreement was signed in February of this year at the Heads of Government Conference, provided resources to assist the government in building out its heritage economy under the Reclaiming Our Atlantic Destiny project. Investing in culture. Where else can you go and find a bank that would do that level of development financing, Mr. President? financing in areas like culture in a very real and significant way, where would you go? Mr. President, those resources provided by CAF helped us to digitize the historical archives that narrate the island's history, and we would have all known of the fire that would have affected the archives. And at that time, government's indication of its intent to be able to advance, not start, because we had started, advance the digitization of its records. So CAF is coming alongside us as a partner in that effort. But resources as well linked to the establishment of a heritage district that would include an ancestral memorial at the Newton Slave Burial Ground and a National Performing Arts Center, building of an amphitheater in the National Botanical Gardens of Barbados, Mr. President, and that is up. We're doing some final things there, but that is also going to be another space that is available, the Richardstown Amphitheater, as well for the performing arts. And also as well, it provided some resources from the airport to help modernize the air navigation equipment at the airport. So this type of investment that we get from this loan facility, it is very hard to get from other traditional partners. And so the investment and our continued investment in CAF, one, provides us with an opportunity, yes, at a greater lending portfolio. It provides us, Mr. President, with the opportunities for technical assistance that is needed. It provides us, Mr. President, with opportunities for investment in non-traditional areas. It provides us with opportunities for our private sector to get much needed capital. And it provides us with an alternative in a global space that has become hostile. It provides us, Mr. President, the ability to have those resources when we see that other traditional avenues, as I spoke about, ODA, private finance, investment, Mr. President, we call it sometimes foreign direct investment, again, is on the decline. When our mobilization here of capital internally needs assistance, this bank serves to be able to provide that. And Mr. President, the investment as well, and this is something that we have to take note of. Right now here in Barbados, there is this major conference that is going on. And you're going to forgive me, I think it is the GUBA Grow United Build Africa Conference. And it brings together, right across the continent, entrepreneurs, Mr. President, influencers, people involved in business right across the continent. It's happening right here in Barbados. This follows, Mr. President, the fact that we have an agreement with the Afrin-Exim Bank to establish its headquarters here. We have, Mr. President, movement from this government to establish embassies right across the continent as well, in order to be able that we diversify our partners and our partnerships. And that is not only significant, Mr. President, and I really want to stress this from a, yes, an investment and finance availability standpoint, but also as well, part of that effort about how we move ourselves away from those traditional relationships that were part of our colonial history, our neo-colonial history, and making that critical shift to open up new pathways for doing business differently in ways that benefit us and ways that allow us, Mr. President, to be able to have voice and to be able to have the necessary space, Mr. President, in order to be able to maneuver. Mr. President, as I said, the investment is a large one on paper, and we have agreed, the government CAF, that we will make that investment over a period of 15 years, Mr. President, over a period of 15 years. in order to allow ourselves, again, based on our knowledge of where we are, what is happening within our economy, to be able to space out that investment to be able to meet, Mr. President, that global figure that I quoted before that we need in order to be able to ensure our accession to membership, to full membership of the bank. And Mr. President, being able to do so as well over 15 years is also extremely significant. Also extremely significant. But importantly, Mr. President, and as we hope that the Honorable Senate will, along the House, pass this bill, and there are some administrative matters to be done, that from December, Mr. President, we will be able to have access to those resources, Mr. President, from December. So we space out our payment over 15 years, but we have immediate access to the resources, Mr. President. So that what if something happens, we have that space that we need within this facility, within this development bank, Mr. President. Mr. President, I've talked about the investment in culture, the investment for technical assistance in water, Mr. President. But we know that the investments that we have had with CAF has helped us to do and respond to our resilience building agenda for our roads and for our water infrastructure as well. And that is extremely important. Mr. President, governments have hard choices to make about how we respond to, like I said, the development challenges. And sometimes it's a difficult conversation to have about how we do that, how we finance that. The concern over whether or not we are borrowing too much, the risk of that, how we prioritize and respond to the challenges that we see. But Mr. President, we have to be able to balance sometimes short-term things and longer-term development gains as well. Investing in the infrastructure to make sure on the South Coast that we don't have sewage on the road again is not something that is going to be immediately beneficial to the average man on the street. The average man on the street perhaps will not see that. But Mr. President, if we understood that building that resilience in our water infrastructure means, one, Mr. President, that we shore up accessibility, that we make sure that our tourism is not impacted by tourists have to wade in through sludge on the street. It ensures, Mr. President, that we will have a tertiary facility, not for today, not for tomorrow, but we're talking about 30, 50 years down the line. And that benefit, Mr. President, just sometimes, Mr. President, like I said before, like the car insurance payment, we don't see it, it comes out, and sometimes you can go 10 years and not have an accident, Mr. President. But the what if, after that 10 years when you do have the accident. So, Mr. President, a mature conversation sometimes needs to be had about investment and what it takes, Mr. President, to then have long-term development gains and potential that sometimes we don't always see immediately. But the government is balancing that, creating space, fiscal space for us to be able to respond, even as, Mr. President, even as it attempts to respond to some of the immediate development challenges that are here for people every day. And that is the balance that we have to be able to strike, Mr. President. And, Mr. President, this facility, Mr. President, allowing us to be able to become full members of this bank provides us with some of that fiscal space that is needed. Mr. President, I believe that the Hansard, the record of the Hansard would indicate that the leader of the opposition would have indicated that he had no issues with the bill. He actually said that the government should be commended, Mr. President, at this time for looking to move to full membership and enhancing our participation in CAF. Of course, that's after he blustered and flustered, Mr. President. But he came around to good reason, saw good reason, and had to admit, Mr. President, that there is need sometimes for that little something in your back pocket, the little vex money, the little tra-la-la, Mr. President, to ensure that we can respond, to ensure that we have the fiscal space, particularly in the current global environment. Mr. President, with those words, I beg that this bill be read a second time.
Thank you, Senator Dr. Chantal Moreau-Knight. Senator Andre Worrell.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I rise to make my contribution in this debate, having memory back in 2014 of actually being on the other side, contributing to the debate to approve Barbados joining and becoming members of CAF, and noting how the institution would be able to assist Barbados in terms of its developmental goals. So at this stage where we see this as just an maturity of our involvement in CAF, I do not see any reason for us to have any opposing views for the government of Barbados extending their membership of CAF from C shares to A shares, and therefore extending the amount in which they will have access to borrow. As the lead spokesperson for the government mentioned, CAF is not only available for the public sector, but it is also available that the private sector as well can make arrangements to borrow funds from the bank for developmental purposes throughout the country. And we do recognize that it is important to have more access to financing, as that has been a troubling area for developing countries in terms of having access to financing to meet their developmental goals. And particular for countries such as Barbados, small island developing states, who, as you would witness as what took place just a few weeks ago in Jamaica with the hurricane, how in a blink of an eye, all of the developmental gains that you have built up for the country can be blown, swept away, and washed away. So therefore, you need to develop some level of resiliency and also the capacity to rebuild in those circumstances, because we've not yet managed to be able to dictate to the hurricanes which path they should take. So we must always be prepared, and our country be in a position that it is ready to rebuild, and not only rebuild, but rebuild with a level of resilience in that building, so that we know every year we will have a hurricane season. We don't know if the hurricanes will pass our way, but we need to have infrastructure in place that can withstand the levels of the hurricanes which we are being exposed to. It may not always be possible, but wherever it is possible, we must be able to do the work for that as well. And we recognize, Mr. President, that Barbados still has a lot of developmental work to do. The lead spokesperson of government business spoke about the South Coast Sewage Project, but that's just one project. But we have not yet talked about a West Coast Sewage Project, which is also needed. And we are hoping that we will hear plans of a West Coast Sewage Project happening soon, because it is important for the survival of our environment and also for our ecosystem and tourism. The bulk of our tourism is along the west coast and the south coast of Barbados, with the west coast being known as the Golden Coast or Platinum Coast at this stage. So obviously we need to be in a position where we can protect the reef, and as a country, we have begun to talk about our blue economy, and that is pretty much a part of our blue economy. So that is just one developmental stage which we need to get to. And I am hoping that these funds will be utilized to go after the developmental projects in Barbados which are necessary, which can contribute to the growth and the development of the country, and not fly-by-night projects which do not contribute and add to the growth and the development of the country, creating monuments which the taxpayers will then have to pay for, which earn no revenue and become a burden on the country. We need to invest the money wisely into projects that the average Barbadian can see the value of these projects that stimulate employment, and employment, I might add, for Barbadians, the many young Barbadians who are at home unable to get a job on construction sites or in any area of Barbados. So we need to see projects that go towards things such as this. And a lot of heavy weather was made about the unfortunate situation where you had sewage on the streets of Barbados, obviously because we had a South Coast sewage project, which was not able to handle the capacity of the development in that area. But we also have a similar situation, not in the south, but in the north of the country. A troubling situation with brown water, which is going into the household of every single, for persons in St. Lucie and St. Peter. And we were recently told by the management of the BWA that that brown water is safe to drink, Mr. President, but I have not yet seen them come in the public domain and drink that brown water. I think, Mr. President, that we need to make sure that these funds go towards fixing and rectifying these issues, because St. Lucie can also be an area of tourist attraction as well, and for development as well, but you cannot encourage tourist attraction and development, or possibly even placing a hospital in that area if you cannot be guaranteed of the quality of the water which will come through the pipe. So these are all areas where the money from CAF and other lending agencies need to go to fix and rectify these problems immediately for the people who are so affected. Mr. President, also, when it comes to development, Mr. President, and growth in the economy, this government has borrowed money as though there's no end. They have borrowed for rainy days that will come probably in the next 30 years or so. Borrowed as though the money has gone out of style. But we have not seen the utilization of those funds for areas of development in Barbados beyond tourism. By that I mean, Mr. President, I have not seen this government show any real appetite towards development in agriculture, not with all of the idle land which I see across Barbados up to this day, even in areas which are overrun by COWICH, causing issues for schools such as the Blackman and Gollop School and a number of different schools across Barbados that have to be closed down because of COWICH issues. Obviously, if you are having issues with COWICH, it means that the land is not under cultivation in agriculture. Because if it was under cultivation and agriculture, there will be no opportunity for the COWICH to take advantage of the land. Agriculture in Barbados needs investment. It needs resources. The farmers in Barbados need access to timely resources to deal. We know that we face droughts from time to time. They need access to resources to outfit their properties with proper irrigation and to have access to water in times of drought. We know that we have unplanned flooding They could be bone dry today, and by tomorrow, 2 days down, you get constant, heavy, persistent rain, and it wash out all of the fields for the farmers, and they have to endure those losses. Can we have a government that sees agriculture as a worthwhile industry to invest in and provide loans and funding for persons within our agriculture sector, not just the big players, not just the cane farmers, but to small farmers as well, who may only have an acre of land or a half acre of land, who may only raise 400 to 1,000 chickens, who may only have a few pigs in their backyard. But these people need access to financing to sustain their livelihood in agriculture. The Ministry of Agriculture need access to equipment and resources so that when farmers want their land plowed, that they don't have to wait for 3 months before the tractor comes to cultivate the land. And by that time, the rainy season has gone and you're into a drought period. And therefore, you can't do anything really with the land. We need to divert some of our borrowing and our investment into those areas so that we can begin to earn revenue from some of the areas that we invest in. We don't earn revenue from monuments. We don't earn revenue from large parks that still become a burden and an expense to the company. You earn revenue from agricultural production. You earn revenue from manufacturing. You earn revenue from the tourism industry. You earn revenue from the cultural sector and the entertainment sector. All of these are areas that I'm hoping that the government will find time to finance small businesses in these areas, that they can have adequate access to financing necessary to keep these businesses operating, Mr. President. I would also like to add, Mr. President, caution, which was issued twice by 2 presidents of the Caribbean Development Bank. First in 2021, and then again a couple months ago, I believe it was in September or October, when both presidents of the Caribbean Development Bank warned of corruption, presented that access to climate loans presented opportunities for corruption, and governments within the region needed to put in place strong accountability and compliance mechanisms, Mr. President, to minimize possible corruption. This was mentioned in 2021 by the then president of the CDB, just a couple of months before St. C became the president, and not too long ago in September or October by the current president of the CDB. And you also heard similar cautions being issued by the Treasury Secretary of the United States to both the World Bank and the IMF with regard to the underperformance of such loans, and urging both institutions to get back to areas where they have control and the necessary expertise to properly manage. It was mentioned by the lead spokesperson in her introduction as she spoke about it in terms of avenues for loans becoming limited by players who may not necessarily understand our situation or have much of a feel for our situation, was mentioned by the lead spokesperson. So I would want to reiterate that as we access loans from a number of agencies, we must put in place the necessary mechanisms for strong accountability and compliance, as mentioned by both CDB presidents. And that strong accountability, Mr. President, I would like to bring it back home. It needs to happen within our parliaments, that we have adequate access to information, and it needs to happen through even committees such as our Public Accounts Committee, which, in order for it to work, Mr. President, the Public Accounts Committee, which is chaired by the leader of the opposition, must have the capacity to investigate current issues and not be weighed down or overruled by the vote of persons from the government who instead would like to set the agenda for issues which they are more comfortable with being investigated. These things you must increase the Public Accounts Committee, Mr. President, that it can investigate the matters which it needs to investigate, and the Office of the Auditor General, Mr. President, that they can investigate and have timely information on the use of these loans, the way how the money is spent, the awarding of the contracts associated with these loans. All of those areas are important. Who gets the contract? How much is paid on the contract? Did we get value for money on the contract? And Mr. President, in looking at current loans which this government has entered into, many Barbadians are one concerned about the volume, the extent to the number of loans which they have entered into. Yes, they could have both back in 2018 and 2019 of going the debt restructuring of our debt, but now today in 2025, our debt has ballooned back up to what it was back in 2018 and 2019, Mr. President. And many Barbadians are concerned.
Point of order.
Yeah, what's the point of order?
The point of order is that the information suggested by the Honourable Senator is actually incorrect. I would have quoted, Mr. President, the reports from the International Monetary Fund, which would have noted, no, Mr. President, not that our debt has gone back to 2018 levels. It actually indicated that the debt continued to decrease, Mr. President. I quoted the figures directly from that report, Mr. President, looking at the fiscal stability, the macroeconomic fiscal stability, and noting that all of our metrics are trending downwards, Mr. President, not increasing, not going back. They continue. Actually, the report indicated, Mr. President, that we have had, I believe it said, 8 consecutive quarters, Mr. President, of growth, Mr. President, as well. And I think that the Honourable Senator should please, in his exuberance to present the argument, should make sure that he's accurate with his facts.
Thank you. Please continue, Senator Warble.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I did not give any metric as to how the debt is being measured, because the figures refer to one way of calculating the debt, which would be debt to GDP. I did not mention that. But when you look at the debt in terms of the dollar value of the debt, Mr. President, no one can argue that today our dollar value of debt is not in the same
Mr.
ballpark.
President, I rise on a point of order. I believe that the Honourable Senator should perhaps, as I did, state his facts and where he is taking his figures from. What he is suggesting is making an argument that is not substantiated by any evidence.
Please press on, Senator Warble.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think that the Honourable Senator has just convinced me that her best presentation in performance in this chamber are often made when she sits quietly at her laptop and complete the work there. She has just convinced me of that, Mr. President. And I want to congratulate her for that, Mr. President. Mr. President, the dollar value of the debt, you just need to go to the central bank report if she needs to find the information. You just need to go to the estimates if you need to find the information, Mr. President. Many Barbadians are concerned. Each time the Prime Minister leaves this country, she returns with another loan. That is the issue that Barbadians have. And the information which is calculated here, Mr. President, in 2018, you had about 3 loan agreements. 2020, yes, you had COVID. We had so many different COVID loans, totaling $100 million US dollars, $200 million US dollars from so many different agencies in 2020 and 2021. In 2022 and in 2023, Mr. President, I believe that you had at least 6 or 7 different loan agreements alone coming to this Parliament. 2024, so far, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different loan agreements coming to the Parliament. And for 2025 so far, Mr. President, I think we have about 5 or 6 different loan agreements. Every single time the Prime Minister visits Barbados, she comes back with another loan agreement for this country. Right, and not in the $10 million loan agreement, but in the hundreds of million dollars in loan agreements. And the issue that Barbadians have today, Mr. President, is that when we look around, we are not seeing where the money is being spent. We are not seeing where the money is being spent. And when it is spent, as for example, I believe that at some point in time, CAF loans were also used for road repairs, possibly in the same mill and pave program. And many Barbadians have begun to see that as some sort of cosmetic surgery that washes off just like cosmetics when the rain falls. Because all of the road which have been milled and paved, Mr. President, as soon as you get a heavy shower of rain, they're back into potholes again. Not even lasting 3 years, 4 years, or 5 years, Mr. President. And that is concerning to many Barbadians. Are we just throwing money down the road, putting cosmetics on the surface of the road to be easily washed off when the rain falls, as they're doing with these millipedes? What we're asking for, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I rise on a point of order.
What's the point of order?
The Honourable Senator is misleading the House, Mr. President. Now, I understand that the Honourable Senator may not necessarily be familiar with the sources of financing in all instances. However, there are some programs that are financed on government's own resources, and then there are those that are financed on loan resources. There is an IDB program that facilitates the financing of roads, Mr. President, and the CAF program is on major roads. The mill and pave is financed from government's own resources. He's conflating different sources of financing for different projects in the interest of being inflammatory, and he is misleading the House in so doing, Mr. President.
Thank you for that clarification. The President, Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. President. So the Honourable Senator is agreeing with me that the mill and pave program is a waste of resources because she has not got up to
Mr. President, I rise on a point of order. I'm not sure who she is. The Honourable Senator, as the longest serving member of this chamber, continues to disrespect the authority of the Honourable President because he does not respect the protocol. There's no she in here, Mr. President. In the first instance, I am not agreeing at all, and not only is he conflating numbers, but he's conflating the English language. I was very clear that there is a major roads program, and in a few moments, when I have the opportunity, I will share what those roads are. But the mill and pave program is financed from the resources of the Ministry of Transport and Works. It is not a part of the CAF program, and I would wish that the Honourable Senator would follow the English language and know the difference between the two, and not attempt to conflate even further. Perhaps he would want to follow his own advice that he just gave to Senator Monroe night and give his best presentation and remain in his seat.
Honourable members, please refer to each other as honourable members. There are no he's and she's in here. And speak through me. I'm the president, and they'll hear you when you do that. Stay on safe and formal ground. The proceedings in the chamber conducted in that level of formality. When we get downstairs, we become he and she again. But please be guided accordingly, all honourable members. Please press on, Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I go back to my point. the honorable senator did not refute my point that the CAF program, Mr. President, not the CAF program, that the mill and paved roads, Mr. President, is just cosmetic, placing cosmetics on the road surface, which is easily washed off. That is the fact, Mr. President. I am not disputing if the money comes from CAF, if the money comes from IA, from the CDB, if the money comes from the Inter-American Development Bank, if the money comes from the IMF, if the money comes from tax receipts. All I am saying is that we have a situation in this country where Barbadians are concerned that projects in this country, that the money is not being well spent to execute and deliver projects in this country which are sustainable. It does not make sense, Mr. President, that you mill and pave a road that can only last for a rainy season. One rainy season later, you have to go back to that very same road. We need to find a better solution. And I understand, Mr. President, that the costs for doing that is astronomical. And when you see the way how it is done, Mr. President, you do not even benefit from the labor component, because oftentimes those roads are done overnight or over a week, as opposed to roads which were properly done in the past with a gradient that employed a number of persons that at least you knew that the money went towards employment of persons, and you had families and individuals working, and you had other people benefiting from that money. But right now, the bulk of that money goes in one area, Mr. President. If the Honorable Senator, Mr. President, would like to get up on a point of order with regard to that, the Honorable Senator, Mr. President, can freely do so. But I don't hear no point of order coming with regard to that. And that is the issue that you should probably raise on a point of order with, Mr. President. The fact that Barbadians are not satisfied that this government is spending the resources which they are borrowing in a way to benefit Barbadians. You have not seen a single low-income housing project coming out of this administration for the 7 years which they have been in. You've seen condominiums, you've seen villas, you've seen hotel projects, you've seen middle-income housing projects by the private sector, but it is a shame for this administration, which said to Barbadians that they cared, but later said, but I only care about certain people, that they have not delivered a single low-income housing project in this country. You have the scandal of the Hope Housing Project, which has been through the hands of a Prime Minister, been through the hands of a Deputy Prime Minister, been through the hands of a Senior Minister, been through the hands of a fired minister, and
Mr.
now...
President, I raise a point of order.
What?
Was a point of order.
I believe that the Honourable Senator, and I am very deliberate with my language and respectful, the Honourable Senator is misleading the House. He has referred to the housing project as government as Hope in particular as a scandal. Mr. President, I am not aware, I don't think the public is aware that there's a scandal in relation to the Hope project. We know that there is supposed to be a forensic audit of that, which the Prime Minister has indicated as well. And therefore, to suggest here that there is some big kind of mysterious thing in which there is massive foul play, Mr. President, is an exaggeration that I believe that is directly aimed at misleading the House.
Thank you very much, Senator. He's expressed an opinion. He could be wrong in his opinion, but he's able to express that opinion. President Sainsbury, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yet again, I sat in awe and amazement at the contribution. For what other reason would you order a forensic audit if there have not been some incidents of possible malpractice that you would need a forensic audit, Mr. President? Answer that question, Mr. President. For what other
Mr.
reason
President,
would
I
you?
rise on a matter of elucidation for the honorable member to note that forensic audits, yes, are used also as a measure of accountability. A forensic audit does not always result and show that there has been malfeasance. Forensic audits help, Mr. President, to show and provide transparency and accountability in the process. It is, Mr. President, in many times, yes, because there might be some suggestion, but it is not always initiated in that case, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Monroe Knight. Please continue, Senator Worrell.
Thank you, Mr. President. Perhaps the senator, in her wrap-up, as she will be wrapping up on this debate, can give an account to Barbadians of how the $60 million in the Hope Housing Project was spent and spare the country the expense of a forensic audit, where a regular audit can do, Mr. President. But I press on, because she has not mentioned to the people of, the honorable senator has not mentioned to the people of Barbados how many houses been built by Hope with that $60 million. Have they yet delivered any low-income housing projects out of Hope with that $60 million, Mr. President? That is my point, Mr. President. This government does not have a track record which they can stand on any low-income housing projects happening in this country for all of the billions of dollars which they have borrowed, Mr. President. That is the point that I am making, that Barbadians are concerned about, Mr. President. They would want to see all of the millions of dollars being borrowed, which have to be paid back by grandchildren. They see some benefit for the people of Barbados in terms of low-income housing projects, which many Barbadians want. In terms of repairs for houses in Bank Hall, Dean's Village, and St. Michael Central area, and all across Barbados by Urban and Rural Development Commission. None of that is happening, Mr. President, with any great speed or in any great amounts that would make the people of Barbados feel or believe that the money which is being borrowed is being spent back on them and on the development of this country, Mr. President. That is the point. That is the point. So, as much as we support this, we are asking the government to change its track record and be more transparent and accountable to the people of Barbados as to how the money is being spent, and so that we can be sure, because a lot of these loans I've been going through, and some of these loans which were borrowed in 2020 or 2018 are now starting to be repaid in 2025. Some of them will start their repayments in 2026. The point is, Mr. President, the government that borrows the money is not oftentimes the government that has to deal with the burden of repaying the money. But if we can see that the money was well spent and benefit the people of Barbados, we can appreciate that. But that is the major problem that Barbadians have today. Is the money well spent? Is it benefiting the large majority of Barbadians? The answer to that question, Mr. President, is no. And you can see that in the housing landscape, not a single low-income housing project in Barbados. You can see that in the construction sector. The construction should generate employment, but the employment, Mr. President, not going to Barbadians. Up to last night, I had a conversation with two young men who would love to get into the construction sector in Barbados, but with all of the villas and other projects going on in Barbados, when you go on those sites, the people being employed are not Barbadian, and sometimes they're not even from the Caribbean region. And we need to make sure that when we spend all of this money, when we borrow all of this money, that Barbadians get to benefit by at least getting jobs within the, through the projects, by at least stimulating economic development. Remember the small business persons in terms of making loans available and accessible to them. not the idea of the expanded trust fund loan at 20%. That does not make sense, Mr. President. Not the idea of the expanded trust fund loans with an interest rate of 20% or more. You need to make low interest loans available to Barbadians as well for small business development and for agriculture, housing, and other areas of Barbados, Mr. President. That is the area which is vital and we need to see. And one final thing that I would beg of this government, I would like to hear from the government in terms of the cap on external loans, how much we have borrowed up to that cap, and whether or not we will have to come to the chamber at some point in time to increase the cap to enable to borrow external loans, because we do know that this expands our ability to borrow from CAF. I believe it is up 400 million, and it now, instead of 4 times the amount, you can go 17 or 18 times the amount, which is a large amount of money. Don't go for it all at one time. Leave some for other administrations that come along, that they will have at least an opportunity or avenue to access loans as well, Mr. President. Don't go for all one time. So they need to control their appetite for borrowing, especially in a situation where they have been borrowing and you're not seeing the projects being implemented, you're not seeing the benefit to the country. You're seeing money being borrowed and quickly utilized for monuments, but you're not seeing the developmental projects coming through. All now the people in St. Lucie are still suffering with brown water, Mr. President. All know we are not seeing any low-income housing projects happening in this country. All know the Queen Elizabeth Hospital still turning back persons every single weekend because the accident and emergency is overcrowded. All know, Mr. President, every single week a different school in Barbados is closed because of environmental issues, and you are just doing cosmetic repairs for 3 or 4 weeks during the summer vacation, and you have not even built a single school in Barbados. In the 7 years in which you have been in, you have not built a single nursery school, primary school, secondary school in Barbados. All know you have not expanded the capacity at the Samuel Jackman Prescott Institute to take additional persons, with the possibility of a campus in St. Lucie, Mr. President, or in other areas, so that persons would not have to compete by having 5 or 8 CXCs to get in to the Polytechnic just to do ordinary courses, so that it is easier for our young people to get into these institutions, to study, to earn a skill. None of these projects are happening under the Barbados Labour Party, but they have borrowed billions of dollars, Mr. President, and they've come in here today to expand their capacity to borrow more, because as I looked at the book, I think that the amount for the CAF loans is at roughly $480-something million, which is probably at the upper limit. So you obviously needed the wiggle room by going to the air shares to expand in terms of the amount of money which you are able to borrow, because you've maxed out on what is there, on what you are able to borrow, Mr. President. But Barbadians would like to see that the money is spent on them, that they can see some measure of development happening in this country, that persons don't have to be crying out wondering when will they be able to afford a house in Barbados, when will they be able to get repairs done in Barbados. Money is not being directed even to agencies such as the Welfare Department, because there are many people out there, Mr. President, who have been waiting for months for some of their applications to be granted. You imagine that someone, a month or 2 months for some of their applications to be approved. People going to the welfare, Mr. President, saying that they have no food or assistance to pay utility bills, and there are much more of them, and within a month they cannot hear an answer from the Welfare Department. Where are the resources going? Where is the money going, Mr. President? That is the question that Barbadians are asking, and I ask this government to look at the accountability and to make sure that the money is spent on projects that benefit Barbadians, not just the big business, but think about the small business and the average person in Barbados as well. Think about the farmers. Come up with a project for farmers. Come up with a project to benefit small business in Barbados. Come up with a project for manufacturing, Mr. President. These are what the people of Barbados are asking for. You are borrowing, the government is borrowing too much money, and we're not seeing where the resources are going, Mr. President. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Warren. Senator Kevin Boyce.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Good afternoon to all honorable members of this chamber. Sir, we heard a very spirited contribution from the opposition, and we have heard the government's statement with regard to the purpose of the debate. I don't think anyone has an issue, sir, with regard to the purpose of the legislation, which is the full membership of CAF. I don't think anyone can have an issue with regard to the access of billions of dollars for developmental drives. I don't think anyone can have an issue with the continuation of what the government has stated to be its South-South perspective, where we seek to work with other developing countries to further our interests. I don't think anyone can say it is a lie to recognize that in these days, which make strange nights, you have to, as they say, bet who bet you and seek where your interests align. Now, sir, we start with the perspective that CAF is currently headquartered in Venezuela. All things considered, the region finds itself having to tread somewhat carefully as it takes the necessary steps to secure its interests. There was a time, sir, I'm sure you will recall, when there was another initiative, not of this sort, where there was a promise of a natural resource at a very cheap rate. And I believe that Barbados exercised fiscal conservative prudence with regard to taking part. And I think that is a theme which has done Barbados well, even though there is a segment and there is somewhat a concept now that you must move fast and break things. For my part, sir, if I were the government, I would certainly be lauding the reduction of the debt to GDP ratio. Having reviewed the paper this week, sir, and I'm referencing the economist, Dr. Jeremy Stevens, an indication that debt to GDP is at 100%, if not lower. A Google search reveals, sir, that based on the references, it is actually at between 102% for the year ending 2024, starting 2025, and some indicators are that it is at 97%. This is something that is to be commended with regard to where the previous debt levels were. Now, while there has been a reduction in debt to GDP, there's been a slight increase with the debt service ratio, which means we are spending more money to pay the money that we are borrowing. And for some reason, the independent senators have me talking about this instead of those who are better versed in the topic. So I will intend to try to make the point in a simple way. I would rather my colleagues who are qualified, but my perspective is this. I think the government can say, look, we have created this fiscal space by the steps that we have taken. I don't think anyone can argue with that. I don't think anyone can argue with the fact that accessing other forms of financing, especially for the stated purpose of climate adaptation and resilience, is prudent. We were here last week, the week before, we mentioned what happened to our brothers and sisters in Jamaica. I don't think anyone can have an issue with funding available for private sector development and, of course, for government projects. So all in all, this is legislation which should be supported by all members of this honorable House. I think, for my part, Mr. President, as well, having listened to the opposition contribution, there's always something to be gained from different perspectives. That's always been my viewpoint, sir. Recognizing the Westminster system and how partisan politics plays its role, for my part, I do believe that there is an argument that given this fiscal space and the speech given by the honorable member minister who spoke on behalf of the government, indicating the proposal with regard to water, embassies, new pathways, culture, technical assistance, resilient buildings, and these other matters which could be financed. For my contribution, sir, I would ask humbly and respectfully if we could also look at some of the low-hanging fruit. And what I call the low-hanging fruit, sir, is something I always speak to my team members and colleagues about where, because of my personal viewpoint, this has nothing to do with anyone except me, I believe that I don't really do trendy, I don't do new, I focus on fundamentals and I focus on systems. So if I could distill from the presentation made by the opposition senator, I believe there is merit in saying that the water situation, and that was addressed by the government member who spoke in relation to what the project could be used for. But this is something that has caught the national attention. It is something which has real vigorous debate. It is something that has been discussed in the lower house. It is something that has been raised by the Member of Parliament for St. Lucie with regard to certain statements made and what should be done. But having spoken to someone from St. Lucie, a close friend of mine, his indication was, despite all the rhetoric, the water is still discolored. So this is what we call the low-hanging fruit in terms of what we could address with this fiscal space. The issue of the roads, it's a fact. Whether the financing is coming from the ministry, whether the financing is coming from an international agency, the issue of the roads is low-hanging fruit that we could look at. The issue of licenses and the difficulties with regard to printing, which has been a perennial problem. The resources for team members to be able to do what they do with the current situation with regard to licensing and the registration of vehicles. The issue with regard to A&E has been debated. We see money being made available to the hospital. You have to commend in terms of resources and improvement, yet the wait time at A&E still is what it is. These are topics which the Barbadian public are debating. We are saying now that we're getting access to more monies, and we're saying we're getting access to more fiscal space. So if I can distill in a neutral manner the issues which captivate the attention of the public, with this fiscal space, the request is, what can we do to facilitate the resolution of these issues? And that is why governing is not easy. We sat here in this chamber and dealt with a debate, I recalled it recently, sir, where we were talking about how the ZRs and the minibuses and having inspectors on the buses and this type of stuff. And sir, to use the colloquial, they still do need dog. I sat down and watched a conversation going on today. Big conversation, one stop going south, one stop going north. So it's one thing to do the policy, it's one thing to put things and get the resources, but where we need to continue to focus on is the implementation. And this is the issue. We have access to international regimes and we have access to international resources. But in terms of the execution and getting the local technocrats to do what they have to do to get that funding in place, it continues to be an issue. And some will say that's not the government's responsibility. But as I have said here multiple times, the government must take credit for the economy. But the same way you take credit for the economy, you cannot repudiate responsibility for other issues. You gotta take the good with the bad in anything in this life. Comes like a marriage, sir. So in the context of what we are debating, let me be clear. This legislation makes sense and should be supported by all members of this honorable House. I also wish to say that the opposition, while somewhat assertively making its arguments from a political standpoint, has raised some issues which I look forward to hearing the government's address as to how they will be resolved. I think also that Barbadians, for their part, are saying, yes, this is good. Yes, let's do the Southwest, let's do the South-South activities. Let's do all this stuff. But there are some fundamentals that we need to keep working on because they continue to be an issue. Finally, sir, my issue is this: as we increase the fiscal space, now that we have the reduction of GDP, I have made this before in this chamber, I will continue to do so. Can we look in the next budget of an ease being given to the young professionals who have continued to play their part for this country? Can something be considered with regard to their tax regime and the obligations that they bear? So, Mr. President, based on those limited perspectives and without the benefits of the more sophisticated economic independent senators, that is my contribution, and I thank you for the opportunity, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Kevin Boyce. Senator Tripp.
Mr. President, honorable colleagues, I rise to support this bill because it really speaks to a fundamental need, a need that was covered before and one that is for Barbados to be able to sustain partnerships that strengthen the foundation on which our modern development rests. In a world defined by uncertainty, more and more so, a world that seems to be shrinking, a world where partners seem to be turning their backs, where priorities are shifting, it is economically volatile. Small states like ours have to be proactive and not wait on persons to grant us permission to determine our fate. And so as the global financial landscape rapidly evolves, we must determine not only the pace of our progress, but also what resilience looks like in our societies. And so it hinges on our capacity to build these kinds of relationships as addressed in this bill by seeking out institutions that understand our realities with partners who see beyond our size and recognize the potential of small island developing states. And so when we examine intersecting crises of inflation, climate, and geopolitical tensions, we really have to recognize that it has redrawn the developmental contours of Barbados and small island developing states. In many instances, the path that we thought we would take has shifted, and so we continue to explore new opportunities and horizons. There is a climate emergency within the crisis. We do not have the luxury of time. At this current moment, as said before, our brothers and sisters across the region who were in the path of Hurricane Melissa are seeking to rebuild. We talk oftentimes about resilience, but fail to realize that when we skip to resilience, we ignore the trauma, the need to cope, to come to terms with the level of loss that comes from natural disasters, to come to terms with the reality that, like in the Philippines, while you are seeking to find those who you have lost in one disaster, you may be preparing for another disaster that leaves you with no time. And while we have not created this crisis, small island developing states, particularly those in the Caribbean, contribute less than 1% of what has caused the disaster that we are witnessing. We are on the front lines while on the financial margins. And so the access and having proactive access to resources such that the government's advocacy and diplomacy has been able to unlock is crucial. There has been a lot of political theater, and I feel like we hear it in every discussion about the issue of debt. And it keeps coming up, and there are concerns about the level of debt. But debt is a tool, similar to how persons borrow for a car or for a mortgage. It is a tool. And people invest in their futures, and countries must do the same. We have to borrow to build. We have to borrow to modernize. We have to borrow to make Barbados more resilient. because we do not currently, given our size and what is available to us, we do not have the capacity to do it on our own. This expectation that independence, or the idea that independence means isolation, is flawed. It cannot survive in a modern world. It will not allow for countries like ours to build better, to build more, and to build faster. If many persons waited until they had all of the capital to buy a car, many of us would still be walking, riding bicycles, or catching the bus. I know that many times we talk about the fact that we do not want to take the bank's money. There are persons who have that. I don't want to get in debt. I don't want to owe nobody no money. But the issue is not borrowing. The issue is whether or not you can pay back. And so this government has borrowed to stabilize the economy. It has borrowed to upgrade hospitals and polyclinics, to rebuild roads and bridges across rural and urban communities, to invest in renewable energy so that our dependence on imported oil does not continue to drain us. We have borrowed to expand housing, improve drainage systems, upgrade schools, training centers, to reform education for the digital era. We have borrowed to digitize public services and to make government more efficient, to work to improve water infrastructure for the Barbados Water Authority, to strengthen social safety nets because we increased the amount that persons received under welfare. We have initiated the One Family program, and during COVID, there was the Adopt a Family program for persons who could not and who were zero-income households. That is what has been done. And we can argue, many will argue, that it is not fast enough. It is not good enough. But we have to continue working to be better, to do better. The household mitigation program that supported persons who were unemployed, those things matter. To get buses, to get garbage trucks, all these things that we could not get before. And so let me say here that context matters, because oftentimes I feel as though the honorable members from the opposition forget the reality and what context we are in. And so we acknowledge, and we have to acknowledge continuously, that in 2018 Barbados was a wreck, that we were in crisis, that the foreign reserves were gone with only a few weeks of imports. The country was drowning in the debt that existed. We could not pay. And the issue at that point in time is that our credit was bad. Nobody didn't want to lend us anything. We closed off ourselves from the international world. Investor confidence had evaporated, and we faced the prospect of defaulting for the first time. Basic public infrastructure, you heard before, sewage on the streets. Other challenges that confronted us. The Queen Elizabeth Hospital was short on equipment, short on everything that you could possibly imagine. There were less than 100 buses on the road, and those buses that were in the fleet were very old, over 10 years. And so we endured what no country in a modern world should endure. The truth is that the Democratic Labour Party left this country running on fumes in 2018. And so the debt that they now decry was not born in this administration. I've said it before, we did not inherit government a tabula rasa, a clean slate. We inherited it with a high level of debt. It was unmanaged, unstructured, and unsustainable. And they knew it. Under this stewardship, the government borrowed not to build, but to plug holes, and we could not figure out where they were coming from. They postponed hard decisions. They kicked it down the road. Maintenance was deferred. Projects were stalled. Social infrastructure that holds a nation together, schools, education, welfare, investment in young people, that was allowed to decay. Sanitation, not having garbage trucks, that is the context. For years, we had no fiscal plan because we were still learning on the job, no clear growth strategy, no idea of what was next, no faith from international lenders. We were at junk status when it came to credit. And so in 2018, we faced a stark choice, and we have faced stark choices to rebuild or allow it to collapse. And this government began the job of rebuilding Barbados' economy and its reputation. We took on the hard work of stabilization because to do not do that would have to be derelict in our duty. We did not have the luxury of inherited stability like they did in 2008. We had to rebuild it from scratch. And while the opposition now pretends amnesia, we can remember the anxiety of those years, and it continues with us today. And so while the opposition seeks to lecture us about debt, about investment, about leadership, it is worth remembering that this government began by clearing a wreckage because we wanted to rescue a nation that they had left behind. We have rebuilt our credibility. We have restored our reputation. We have reignited our economy. To say that the debt continues to rise, as pointed out before, is incorrect. It is to engage in alternative truths, facts, and a simple search on Google, www.google.com, and type in the debt to GDP ratio or the economic performance of Barbados, you will see all that you need to. I am sure that Wi-Fi works in this chamber. I'm on it currently. And so it baffles me that we could stand and say that here with any sense of confidence. There is audacity in that. Mr. President, it is interesting that the Democratic Labour Party has discovered its voice on matters of international engagement, because for a very long time they were silent everywhere. It is this government that has stood and spoken boldly to address the issues of climate. Silent when Barbados' economy was collapsing. Silent when there was sewage on the streets. Silent when our international credit rating sank to junk status. Silent for our reserves, and silent at home when Barbadians were crying out. The silence was truly deafening, Mr. President. And so the irony oftentimes in this chamber to me is comical as well as insulting, because the same party that left us with nothing now wishes to lecture a government that continues to restore all of these things. No one was listening before. They are listening now. Foreign policy was invisibility, and diplomacy was non-existent. And so it takes, like I said, a special kind of audacity to criticize the Prime Minister for traveling, for her advocacy, for standing on an international stage and representing. And so yes, a round clock is right twice a day. And we do not argue that there are things that we must continue to fix. And we have committed and we are investing in doing just that, because the cost of silence, the cost of inaction, the cost of invisibility is too high a price for us to pay. And I want to speak very briefly to the travel schedule that keeps coming up, because we have to rubbish the notion that Barbados can protect its national interests by sitting quietly on the sidelines of global matters. You cannot shape the world agenda from the shoreline, from Barbados. You cannot demand fairer financing. You cannot demand equitable trade. You cannot demand meaningful debt reform by standing outside the rooms where those decisions are made. If we are not there, we are not considered. And when we are not considered, our priorities and our people are forgotten. The global order does not stop to accommodate those who refuse to engage, and under this administration, we have continuously engaged. Mr. President, every time our Prime Minister steps on the international stage, she carries a mandate of necessity. And we see that with the passing of Melissa. We see that with freak storms. We see that with the heat in Barbados. We are sweltering. We see that with the realities that we face. Every shock, every shift, it touches our people. And so if we are unable to advocate for ourselves, my question is, if not us, then who? To sit still while others decide our fate would be, once again, a dereliction of our duty. And so because we cannot afford to be a spectator, our Prime Minister must travel. She carries with her the realities of small states. And those who criticize her for showing up internationally may find comfort in silence, as they have exemplified. But silence has never shifted the balance of global inequity. Being silent has never allowed for a change to occur. In silence, we are complicit. In silence, we accept the treatment that we receive. And in silence, there is no progress. Mr. President, if Clement Payne had been silent, we would not be where we are today. If Errol Barrow had been silent, and if successive leaders had been silent, Grantley Adams, Tom Adams, and we can go down the list, the line of those who have spoken on our behalf at every single level. If workers are silent, nothing will occur on their behalf, because those who say nothing are seen as being in agreement, and we cannot afford that. It is easy to mock participation when one does not plan to engage the world. And so we do so not for headlines, but for results. And this was not the presentation I truly intended to give today, let me say that. But once again, it is difficult to sit here sometimes and to listen to the talking points that seem never to be changed and just to be a rearranging of words for every debate. We hear the same thing over and over again. We understand that there is politics at play. And maybe because we are in November and the gala is coming up, we are in a theater. But that cannot continue to be what is brought. And it is frustrating as a young person, because to listen to arguments about or discussions about the Prime Minister's travel, as if we do not accept that we are in a growingly interconnected world, or to listen to challenges about debt when we recognize that the size of Barbados' economy continues to be exceeded by the needs of our people and the wants, it's frustrating. And so, Mr. President, I want to close with a simple reflection. We all understand storms. We have seen in how just a few hours a storm can wreak havoc. It can destroy years of progress. And I want us to consider, if that storm lingered, if it just sat there, how that destruction would be amplified. If it was unrelenting, pounding away, rain pouring, how our drains would flood. The damage would not just be confined to branches or flooded roads, it would be even deeper, even more. The cost would be astronomical. And now, consider the amount of time it takes to rebuild after a storm. Consider the amount of time it takes to fix everything, to restore things that have been lost. Rebuilding is not instant. It requires patience, resources, and a steady hand. You cannot rebuild in the same hour that it takes to clear the debris. You must repair foundations, lay new blocks, rewire what is broken, and reimagine what must never be built again and what must be built better. And that is what this government has been doing, rebuilding Barbados after the storm that we inherited. But let us take that analogy one step further, Mr. President. Imagine that storm not coming across the Atlantic Ocean, but based in George Street. And imagine that storm being there for 10 years of economic mismanagement, infrastructural neglect, institutional decay, and international absence. 10 years of silence and stagnation at home. That is the storm that we have endured. A decade of drift, with no purpose or direction that left our economy battered and our institutions weakened, our people weary, and in many instances angry. So yes, Mr. President, I stand here and I will do so at every debate to note that there is still work to be done. We are still laying pipes in St. Lucie. The QEH expansion is still continuing. We are still working to ensure that our social welfare nets are restored, protected, strengthened, so that we protect the most vulnerable. We are doing poverty assessments because we need to understand where our people are and who deserves the most help and who must receive the most assistance. This is not overnight work. And so brick by brick, policy by policy, partnership by partnership, forum by forum, we are going to repair the roads. We are going to make sure that waters reach the communities, clear water. We are going to make sure that schools and clinics are upgraded. We are going to make sure that we have a full bus fleet once again, that digital systems are replace outdated processes, and that the international respect that we could not find in 2018 continues to be rebuilt with every agreement and every engagement. This government and this administration does not pretend at any point in time that the journey is finished, because development is not a destination. It has always been a journey. But unlike the storm in George Street, this government continues to move. We are clearing the debris, reinforcing foundations, and we are determined that no future government should ever allow this country to fall into such disrepair. And that is why this bill matters. It is another beam in the structure that we are creating, another part of the foundation. It holds us up. The storm has passed. We have learned lessons, and those lessons will remain. Barbados is rebuilding not in rhetoric, but in reality. And Mr. President, while there is still work to be done, the difference between today and the government of today and those of yesteryear is that the work is being done. With that, I am obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Tripp. Senator Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to spend some time on the bill, and thank you for giving me the floor in this second reading of this bill. I want to take the opportunity in this moment, Mr. President, to realign this debate about the bill and to go into the substance of the bill in full. And I want to thank those who have gone before. No, if I go through the bill before the Honorable Chamber, Mr. President, we have the first clause, which speaks about what the act is about, and it connects it to our national priorities. But then I get into clause 3. There are a number of financial provisions that are outlined in clause 3, Mr. President, which will ensure that the sums payable by the government to CAF are charged and paid out of the consolidated fund. Now, I'm going through these deliberately for a reason, Mr. President, because I want to make a substantive point. Any receipts from CAF are also returned to the consolidated fund. This, Mr. President, quite simply put, is a part of Barbados's government's fiscal discipline and transparency. These are the principles that Barbadians are demanding. These are the principles that the honourable member for the opposition who spoke talked about, but they're enshrined in the bill, Mr. President. We haven't talked about them as best endeavour matters. They are enshrined in the legislation before this honourable chamber. It means, Mr. President, by connecting it to the consolidated fund, that every dollar drawn or every dollar paid into the consolidated fund from CAF is tracked, is audited, and it is integrated into our national accounts, Mr. President. In clause 4, it speaks about the ability of the minister to raise loans, and it gives the government the ability to borrow the sums to meet our obligations and to ensure that we can replace funds already paid. But Mr. President, this is an enabling clause, if I could call it that. It connects directly to Barbados's obligations or ambitions to have access to development financing. That's what this bill before this chamber is about. It gives us the power to raise capital for investment, not for consumption. And you heard my colleague who led off debate on this bill speaking about Christmas loans. Now, Mr. President, we have institutions that right now are gearing up to put consumption loans on the market. If you want to go and buy a whole heap of clothes and furniture for Christmas to look good, that's called a consumption loan. But if you want to be able to get access to loan financing to renovate your house and therefore increase the value of your property, that's an investment loan, Mr. President. That's what this bill before this chamber is about. Accessing development financing, not for consumption, but capital that will finance roads, will finance energy, and I'm going to speak about energy in a moment, will finance our resilience agenda, and that is such a critical point. The honourable member who spoke in leading off the bill talked about what happened in Jamaica last week. As we met, we paused and stood for a moment of silence in honour of those who passed as a result of Hurricane Melissa in Jamaica. The resilience agenda, but Mr. President, the resilience agenda is a real thing, because one of the concerns that is coming out of Jamaica in the aftermath of Melissa is how we inbuild resilience in the recovery process. How do we not inbuild vulnerability in the rebuilding process? We saw how roofs blew off, Mr. President. Resilience means that you are rebuilding with hurricane-resistant roofs, hurricane-resistant structures. And so that is what resilience means for us. Right here, and I'm speaking about energy now, in Barbados, we in this honorable chamber passed an Electricity Supply Act. In that legislation, Mr. President, we put some provisions in there for undergrounding of the infrastructure for energy, in particular our transmission and our distribution lines. Mr. President, up until earlier this week, Jamaica had 32% of its electricity grid recovered. 32% of its electricity grid had been recovered. There's a wind farm that we have been monitoring, Mr. President, and that wind farm in particular had been taken out of rotation and operation in advance of the storm. It suffered mere cosmetic damage and was ready to be put back into generation capacity. But you know what, Mr. President? Because there was no resilience at the time in the building of the infrastructure, all the infrastructure for transmission and distribution lines were above ground. There is nothing to connect that wind farm to get that energy into the grid. And so the wind farm is a stranded asset until the lines have been replaced. We are talking about rebuilding resilience in Barbados, and our energy infrastructure is being rebuilt as resilient. And that's what we're talking about when we go for development financing like this, and ultimately leading to economic transformation and development of our country more broadly. In Clause 5 of this bill, it talks about the agreements for subscription of additional shares, and it allows Barbados, not at the level of cabinet, Mr. President, not in Roebuck Street, Mr. President, at the Barbados Labour Party, and certainly not in George Street, but with parliamentary approval to subscribe for more shares in CAF over time. That is transparency, Mr. President. That is accountability. It brings it back to the Parliament. That's what the legislation before us calls for. So I'm always confused, Mr. President, when I hear a person stand and speak without colliding in any way to the legislation that is right before them, calling for things that are embedded in the bill before our consideration. It doesn't make sense. It has to be brought back to Parliament, Mr. President. This makes sure that we are able to not just scale our participation, deepen our stake, and of course, make sure we have a stronger voice in the institution at the leadership level, but that we do so with parliamentary approval. That's this chamber and the other place. In Clause 6, Mr. President, this is a standard clause, and it talks about privileges and immunities. We typically provide these to all of our international and regional organizations, and it makes sure that their regional office is covered by those. But, Mr. President, you also have at Clause 7, the ability of the minister to make orders to carry the agreements into effect. And that is the kind of flexibility that we're needed at the implementation level, and it allows for us to embed that in the structure of government. But finally, Mr. President, Clause 8 then repeals the 2015 Act, which was signed before, which looked at the predecessor arrangements, and it ensures, again, right here in a legislative framework, that what we are doing is anchored in parliamentary approval. So, Mr. President, in summary, what we have before us is a bill that gives us the legal scaffolding for everything that follows and that I'm going to speak about, and the honourable member who led the bill led off about. The honourable member spoke about the diversification of capital. That's what this bill does. The honourable member spoke about the transformation of our infrastructure. That's what this bill does. And I am going to speak, Mr. President, about how this framework allows us to accelerate our energy transition. But before I get there, Mr. President, there are Barbadians, and I accept that, who are raising concerns about debt. Not because the honourable member for the opposition is sharing fake news, misguided news, deliberately incorrect news. And so, Mr. President, that's not what Barbadians are talking about. They are raising concerns about debt. Let me take a few moments to speak about what that means, Mr. President. Every responsible government must speak about what the debt levels are actually, what our debt service capability looks like, and we must answer those questions clearly, simply, and truthfully. There can be no arguments about that, and so I agree with the honourable independent senator, because there's no independent political party. There's an independent, we speak as individuals on the independent side. So I agree with the honourable member who spoke as an independent earlier. But this bill is not about Barbados being reckless with new debt. It is not about us taking on new debt. It is about improving the quality, the structure, and purpose of the financing that we actually have access to. The honourable member, Senator Chantal Monroe-Knight, spoke earlier about our debt to GDP ratio, and I'm sure that in her wrap-up, she's going to speak to that. But when we borrow from CAF, we're doing it for some very specific reasons. Mr. President, CAF's loans are long tenor, they are concessional, and they are aligned to our development outcomes. They are capital investments. I want to make this point here, Mr. President. It was raised earlier, and in an unfortunate statement about climate loans being prone to corruption. It was an unfortunate statement, Mr. President. It really was, because we know we live in a world where for some of us, climate is a real thing. Climate events is a real thing. The climate crisis is a real thing. We only have to look around our region at what has happened with our neighbors, and climate is a real thing. But there are those who believe that climate science is conspiracy theory, and so they don't want to have financing attached to anything called climate. And we accept that that is the right of any individual or any country to take that position. But that does not mean that for those of us who live it every single day, who know what sustainability needs to look like, who understand what sea level rise looks like, who understand what the impact of our climate crisis has been on our country, it does not mean that we do not have to make sure that when sources of financing go away from traditional sources because climate is no longer offered on the table, that we cannot access financing for our development goals from other spaces, like CAF. Mr. President, that's what we are here for. It has nothing to do, Mr. President, with corruption in this instance, and that was an unfortunate reference because it minimizes the legitimate concern of every single small island developing state, every single developing state that has signed on to instruments or institutions that have been advocating for the Bridgetown Initiative, for concessional financing, for affordable capital, and for our development concerns to be placed squarely on the international table. The Loss and Damage Fund, Mr. President, in COP28, Senator Monroe-Knight will speak about that, I'm sure. If her Honour Deputy, Madam Deputy President was here, she would speak about that as well. Has it been capitalized? No, Mr. President. So when a country like Barbados wants to finance its development, where will we go? So under Clause 4 of the bill, the Minister's borrowing authority is framed within the law, and it is tied to Section 3's fiscal controls. It is ensuring by so doing that all transactions are not corrupt, but they are subject to audit and oversight. This is fiscal discipline, Mr. President, and it is embedded in the legislation. That is the hallmark of this government. Barbados' debt trajectory, Mr. President, has very much moved down, not up, and our primary balances have remained positive. With this bill, we are strengthening and not weakening our fiscal management tools. Now, I want to go into a couple of details, Mr. President, that were erroneously mentioned earlier. Now, in the first instance, let me get into the easy ones first. I want to put it on record in this honorable chamber that the interest rate for trust loans is not 20%. That is an untruth. The interest rate for the Barbados Trust loans is 5% on the reducing balance. 5% and not 20%. This is why Barbadians often get concerned, because they are told things that are not accurate. And they hear those things sometimes from what they believe are authoritative voices. That is not true. I want to take a moment also, Mr. President, to point out about the functioning of the Public Accounts Committee. I sit on the Public Accounts Committee. Yes, the leader of the opposition is the chair of the Public Accounts Committee. But as with every committee, you have a consensus of the whole. The government of Barbados is not attempting to stifle consideration of new items. The fact of the matter is, the leader of the opposition does not wish to debate the items that are already on the Public Accounts Committee's agenda. He wants to debate matters that are not on the Public Accounts Committee's agenda. And what do I mean when I say that? There is a report that is to come to the Public Accounts Committee. It has not been laid by the Public Accounts Committee or by the Parliament of Barbados. But the leader of the opposition refuses to have the Public Accounts Committee meet for over a year now to discuss the legitimate issues that have been on the Parliament's agenda for some time now, because he wants to have the country believe that a matter not before the Parliament is being refused by the government of Barbados. That is not fact, Mr. President. It is not truthful. Mr. President, the Public Accounts Committee can meet to debate and to finish the matters that were on the agenda. I even took the time, as if I don't have enough to do, to agree that I would be willing to join a small group to go over the findings of the previous PAC, to be able to summarize what the outcomes were, to be able to have them put before the committee in a formal way so that we can move forward. The meetings have not been convened since then. The leader of the opposition would wish for us to discuss the special audit of Hope. That has not, to this date, to the best of my knowledge, been laid before the Parliament of Barbados. Until such time as that report by the Auditor General's Office is laid in Parliament, there is nothing before the Public Accounts Committee to discuss. So it is erroneous to attempt to suggest to the public of Barbados that the Public Accounts Committee has a matter before us that the government is refusing to allow the opposition to discuss. It is not truth. Now, Mr. President, I also want to just point out that the call for transparency and information on all of the loans that the government has taken out over time is also a ruse. When I stand here on mornings, when the Senate opens, on the order paper, Mr. President, there is the way in which the order of business is laid out. The formal entry of His Honor the President, that would be you, Mr. President. Prayers, if our chaplain is here, and if not, there are members of the chamber who take responsibility for that. Messages from Her Excellency the President, announcements by Her Honor, and presentation of petitions, presentations of papers. The clerk calls those things faithfully every week. Under presentation of papers, week on week on week, any and every single loan or financing arrangement that has been entered into this country has been laid in this Parliament. It is laid in the other place, and it is laid in this chamber under presentation of papers. Just today, I laid loan agreement 2/854 Urban Renewal Project. And it says, that I'm reading it deliberately, Mr. President, because it says explicitly what the loan is to be used for. It says this, Mr. President, the loan agreement number 2854, Urban Renewal Project in the water, housing, and infrastructure sector, phase 1, between the Saudi Fund for Development and the government of Barbados. Every single loan is read into the record of Parliament and laid in Parliament, and the explanation of what it is for given. It is not accurate to suggest that there is any lack of information on loans presented by this government. They're all laid here. And if we want access to information, all we have to do is, rather than continue to call for information that is readily available, is to use what is already there. Mr. President, it is there already. So that I want to also put on the record. So now let me come very quickly as I bring this home to the energy portfolio. We have, but actually, no, not the energy portfolio yet, Mr. President. Barbados has already been working with CAF with about a $100 million loan launch in 2017 and still ongoing. Under the 2017, you heard that first loan, Mr. President, 2017, $100 million in 2017 and still ongoing. And then we have a subsequent portfolio which was developed for the National Road Rehabilitation and Infrastructure Program. Under that program, it's called the CAF Roads Project. 26 roads have been completed across parishes, with another 11 under active rehabilitation. Over 20, not minor roads and not mill and pave, 20 major road segments were resurfaced and rebuilt in 2025 alone. The works that were undertaken included culverts, drainage, sidewalks, guardrails, signage, and utility relocation. I started out by pointing out that utility lines now have to be placed underground for the resilience agenda. And so utility relocation, all of that has been undertaken. The program is most certainly not cosmetic resurfacing. It is full-scale infrastructure renewal. There are roads that we are complaining are taking long that we can see in front of our face, Mr. President, because it's a full infrastructure renewal. Prior Park in St. James, Mr. President, Shop Hill in St. Thomas, Cottage Vale in St. Philip, Chancery Lane in Christchurch, Bagatelle Gardens in St. Thomas are all being rebuilt in a major infrastructure transformation. And if we were to come to St. Lucie, Mr. President, if we were to come to St. Lucie, let's come there for a moment. Now we have water issues that have been raised by members of the public, and no one can question that people want to be able to drink clear water from their taps. That's a fact. Can't question that, can't argue with that. I would never say otherwise. So you want to drink clear water from your taps, and you should have a right to clean water. It's actually one of our human rights, clean water. So, Mr. President, what does this government do? This government takes the time to make sure that they are investing in a major mains replacement program in St. Lucie. Now, you gotta give to take, right? So you can't dig up a road, especially if it is a major infrastructure artery or major infrastructure work. It doesn't happen overnight, Mr. President. It can't happen quick because you got to dig it up, you got to put the drains, you got to get the design work done, you got to put the utilities on the ground, you got to make sure that all the things are in place before you resurface it. In some communities, and I know this very well, Mr. President, even just this week we were having a conversation in one St. James community. Someone called to say, Lisa, can I get natural gas in my area? Are you guys doing natural gas in the area? And the reason they asked was because there was a road project that was underway, a major infrastructure road project in that area, and they wanted to know if before the road was finished, if natural gas pipes could be installed so the residents in the area could have access to natural gas. And so the natural gas teams, along with the utility teams, along with the transport and works teams, along with the construction teams, they were rationalizing what they needed to do, how long it would take. And there was a trade-off. The trade-off was, if they were to complete the road works, reinstate the roads, give everybody the nice, clean, smooth roads that they want, then you can't have the same ability to extend the project to put the infrastructure underground. So you're balancing it out. You're balancing it out. How do you provide services to people? How do you get the resilience agenda and still have the roads put into place in a timely manner? This is happening all over the country, Mr. President. And so in St. Lucie, the mains replacement project is underway to make sure that we're able to give people clean water. And in so doing, it has meant that that work has dug up the roads. And so the rehabilitation of the roads now needs to be done. But the visibility and the inconvenience is in itself a clear, visible indication that the government is working to resolve problems, Mr. President. What were we to do? Should we have left the brown water, not replace the mains, not have the roads dug up, so that we could have people pomp setting and talking about brown water in perpetuity? You have to change the pipes in order to address the issue, because the honorable senator who led off the debate talked about non-revenue water. And why was there non-revenue water? Because no government before this government did mains replacements of 60-year-old pipes, Mr. President. We did it. We did it. And so, Mr. President, in the energy sector, as I close, this is perhaps one of the most infrastructure-heavy sectors that this country is going into. We, on Friday of last week, published, I have to say, phew, after a really slog at it, Barbados' first request for proposals for battery energy storage systems. No, Mr. President, again, this is a clear example, the interconnection of those battery storage systems, Mr. President, to the grid must go underground. That is a requirement of the Electricity Supply Act. But it means that there's expensive work that has to be undertaken. And I am hopeful that CAF and the financing available for CAF would allow us to do some of that work. Equally, Mr. President, we are now on the final runway to launching Barbados' very first onshore large-scale, utility-scale, I should call it, wind farm, between 30 to 60 megawatts in St. Lucie. Equally so, Mr. President, that is major infrastructure. Between those two projects, that's approximately $300 million in projects. Those are private sector financing projects. This CAF bill, by moving from the series, moving to the new series category, it allows us to unlock private sector capital to bring partners like CAF into the mix, Mr. President. So things like grid modernization, storage that I have just talked about, establishing resilient microgrids, distributed generation, electric vehicle infrastructure, and energy efficiency retrofits, along with the requisite technical assistance for policy, regulation, and workforce training that was done for the Barbados Water Authority, where they did have technical assistance, what was done for the Ministry of Responsibility for Infrastructure, where they did have a technical assistance portfolio. All of these are possible, Mr. President, because of sections 4 and 5 of the bill, which empower us to borrow and subscribe for shares in order to access these instruments. And the first and the second schedules to the bill will allow us to have the contractual keys to unlock that kind of financing. This is how Barbados will convert its energy vision into real projects, Mr. President, how we have real savings and real jobs. And Mr. President, I want to commend this bill to the Chamber. I want to support this bill, and I want to also ask that as persons consider the bill, that we consider the development agenda that we've just spoken about, and we also look at how we balance what we want with the inconvenience sometimes that it takes to getting there. I'm obliged, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Cummins. Senator Dr. Senator Morris.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise to lend my support to this resolution before this before the Senate. And I do so, sir, cognizant of issues relating to matters that can affect us negatively. I've heard the notion of hurricanes, of natural disasters. We ourselves have had our spate of unfortunate circumstances, and we had to find it within our resolve to get over these issues, either mentally or financially, however we tried to get over. I, sir, spent a number of years going to Jamaica, and I was involved, not I caused them, sir, but I was in Jamaica when 2 hurricanes struck Jamaica in one weekend. Sir, that is something that I would not want upon anybody at all. The discomfort it caused us. We are staying in a hotel, no water. A whole set of Caribbean people in the hotel, no water. You're fighting to get food. You're doing all sorts of, you see the whole land disturbed. I've seen it, sir. And I would support any means to give us that resilience to solve such problems when they come. I support this bill, sir, because we have always been taught to prepare for the future. You don't know what will happen. And that is why people pay insurance. People insure their cars, they insure their homes, because they do not know what will happen in the future, and yet they're preparing for that future. So I support this. But I never thought, sir, that this issue of a CAF involvement would lead us to where we went, or where we are now, sir. When the Honorable Senator for the opposition began to speak, or was about to speak, both Senator Trim and I shared notes. And we both predicted the very things that were going to be said by the Honorable Opposition Senator. Because it has become a recitation, sir, to say the same thing every week we meet on every issue. It has become the same thing. Sir, I voiced my concerns to Senator Trim, and she responded, as you heard in her speech. And I must say that I'm very proud of her, my former student, but at the same time, sir, she's my daughter in whom I'm well pleased. Sir, as a student of history, I have learned to look at trends. I have learned to form linkages. I have learned to analyze those linkages, sir. And I have learned to come to conclusions. But more importantly, sir, I've also learned to see matters in context. And therefore, sir, I never look at the tree without the context of the entire forest. And what are we seeing here, sir? Not just a matter of loans and borrowing and debt and the economy and roads and water. Sir, this, in my view, is a deliberate attempt to distract the public from the fact that even in this Senate, the opposition is still in confusion, that they are still not unified. They are trying to distract the public from the fact that sometimes only one opposition member is here, and at times none at all. And this is what is happening, that they cannot be unified, that they have brought, sorry, sir, not they have brought, it seems as though that George Street attitude has invaded this or permitted the Senate. That is what I'm seeing. That at no point, so when last did we see a full complement from the opposition in this Senate? And these are things that we have to do.
I rise on a point of order,
Yes.
and I think that the Honorable Senator should withdraw his comments.
Yes, Senator Reverend Morris, it is against our standing orders to include proper motives to members, and I think we will all be present or absent from time to time, and I think that you're trespassing on, not unintentionally so, but trespassing on suggesting that there could be some improper reason for the absence. And I think really that you should withdraw that and move on. Presence and absences are a fact of life, and we shouldn't read more into them. We have several members who are absent today, and I know exactly where they are, what they're doing. They're there on their various applications. We are happy to have some who were here today that weren't here last time, and I think really that you really should withdraw that and move on.
Sir, I'd be so guided by you, but I am guilty, sir, of following the the leader of the senator from the opposition as he was doing in his speech, sir. Oh, I got the impression, sir.
Again, Mr. President, I raise on a point of
Just follow
order.
me, please. Just follow me, Senator Morris. We will not lead you astray. Please press on with your presentation.
Yes, sir.
Ignore who's present, absence, or otherwise.
I'll be good at you, sir, but
because
I would not,
you-
I would not follow the opposition.
And you will not
anymore.
be present every day either. We will not try to read anything into your absence.
Yes, sir. All I'm saying, sir, and all I want to say is that I've noticed that I have,
Senator Morris, please move on. Please, don't try to explain the point.
so I'm not even going there. All I was saying that I have noticed that I should follow your guidance. That's what I was about to say. But, sir, I think that when we look at some of the things that were said by the opposition senator, we talked about agriculture. We talked about borrowing is too high. We talked about building is not a school was built. Young people not in construction. All of these things, sir. And all I'm saying is that let us look at what is happening in the country. Because it seems to me that we are looking at matters with our eyes wide shut. Some of us, sir. Maybe me too. Sir, as you know, I'm on a call-in program, and I cannot justify or prove all that happens, or all who call in there. But I know that there were some persons, sir, who called from St. Lucie, or they claim to have called some from St. Lucie, who complained about the water, that the water was brown. And the one explanation was that it was, whereas there was a problem before, that what has happened is that they are trying to narrow it down to find out what is the exact problem, and then they realize it is only one particular area that they're working on. That the issue is not all over St. Lucie, as people would want us to believe. One caller said that, you know, a lot of people are calling about the water not even from St. Lucie. No, I'm not saying that they're not in issues, but I'm also saying that let us get to the real truth, or not real, the truth. Young people not in construction, sir, I've said in here before that you have an employment rate of about 6%. That is almost full employment, sir. And therefore, some industries and some areas are going to suffer because of a shortage. Not that because people cannot find jobs. But there are many Barbadians who are working in construction, and there are many other persons who we call not Barbadians working in construction. The point is that where we are, we did this last week. Immigration, sir. Nothing wrong with that. They're not building one single school, sir, to put who in. Have you ever thought about that? That every year fewer and fewer children are taking the common entrance exam, and that fewer and fewer schools, more and more schools are having fewer and fewer children? Have we taken that into consideration? The borrowing. Yes, sir, the borrowing is high, but the country is stable. But there was a time when there was no borrowing, and yet we were being downgraded almost every week. Furthermore, we talk about agriculture, and that is why these things must be answered. And I will not be distracted by those who are here or those who are not here. Food security, sir. I don't know, vertical farms. You know, I think it was the Aztecs. It was the Aztecs who used to have floating gardens. Am I right? It's the Aztecs or the Maya? Well, sir, okay. But they used to have floating gardens because of their environment. And because of the way our climate is shifting, that is where we have to go. So we have vertical farms. Because we have to look now at smart agriculture. The Blackbelly sheep project we had with Guyana was laughed at, scoffed at. There's Project CARE, sir. Project CARE. CARE, Community Agriculture Response for Empowerment. This Project CARE empowers communities, yet we're hearing that nothing is done in agriculture. Isn't there a Barbados Institute of Food and Agriculture at Hope Plantation in St. Lucie? The greenhouse programs at schools? The tissue culture lab? The agriculture research that is going on with the University of the West Indies? Isn't that agricultural development? And those are just a few. But we are hearing all sorts of things, except every speech, sir, is the same thing. And I'm willing to bet, I'm no prophet, I'm not even the son of a prophet, but I'm willing to bet you that if we have to discuss housing, we're going to hear the same thing again. So, sir, I think that when it comes to these things, I go by evidence. And Barbadians need to go by evidence. Not what is said. Because I've noticed, sir, I can't remember the term that is used for it, but I can read it up and come back at some point. There is a term that every issue we bring, no matter how good, it is treated as though there's something suspicious underneath. And that's what is happening with some of these things. When they hear about I can't remember the word you said, but when they hear about all of this, opening up for this thing to be exposed and the next thing to be exposed, you're treating matters, sir, as though it is there, but that's not what it really is. There's something underneath, more serious. But at the same time, it is always more scandalous. And this is how I believe we need to look at these things from now on. Look at these things from now on. And Barbadians need to be careful at times too with what is put out there. Because one of the things I've noticed, sir, is that the lie is always more attractive. That the lie goes at a speed even beyond one of those supersonic missiles. And if we do not stop these falsehoods, and we nip them in the bud, they will continue to spread. And what will happen, sir? Barbadians may very well be duped into making a decision that they may regret later. And if you're going to use emotion and all of these what I call untruths, to entice people, then I have to go back to the book of Ecclesiasticus, as was done before 2018, sir. Sorry, 2008. Change. And what happened after that? But let me give you a scripture verse for that. You may not find it in your Bibles. But this was said in 1511. 1511 on Whit Sunday at the Cathedral of Santo Domingo by Montesinos. If we take that kind of attitude, it says, he that sacrificeth of a thing wrongfully gotten, his offering is ridiculous, and the gifts of unjust men are not accepted. That is found in, I think, the 18th chapter of Ecclesiasticus, not Ecclesiastes, a book in the Apocrypha. And I'm saying to you, sir, and said to this whole, and I'm saying to Barbadians, that when it comes to serious matters, let us deal with these. If you were telling me that this bill, this resolution, if you point out all its faults, but you agree with it, when you say you say, I'm not speaking to any person specifically, but you agree with it, but then you come in with all sorts of things, innuendo, that can cause problems. I believe, sir, that we need to return to these matters as the leader of government business rightfully did, brought us back to the points in the resolution. I thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Reverend Rogers. Senator Dr. Mulroney.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I want to thank all of the honorable senators that spoke to this bill with some level of maturity. We didn't get that from everyone, unfortunately, but to those that were able to engage in a debate that was measured without exaggeration, that spoke to the issues of the bill, but not in a way that was politically inflammatory. Those that looked at the issue of how we are able to finance development in a real way, as opposed to trying to distort facts in an attempt to gain points, I want to say thank you. This honorable chamber has a big responsibility, Mr. President. And that responsibility is extremely important because of the time that we are in, because of how we need to be able to galvanize our society and build resilience, particularly in the context that we have. It is a time when we have to, yes, make sure that we educate our population so that they understand the issues and are then able to make measured choices about how they operate, about how they plan for themselves, and how we as a country are able to plan nationally. And that responsibility, Mr. President, is huge and it weighs. And certainly one of the things that I have reflected on in this debate is the extent to which we take that responsibility seriously, our responsibility not to ourselves, but to the public, and to have a debate that, again, that is responsible and mature, Mr. President. And while we all want to be able to defend our politics in some measure, there has to be some level of a line in terms of how we do that in a way that does not distort. Mr. President, it is clear, I believe, those that are able to intelligently read information and understand facts, all of the evidence, Mr. President, all of the evidence clearly identifies, as I said before in my presentation, the Barbados economic fundamentals are strong, Mr. President. It is clear, Mr. President, and I want, Mr. President, with your permission, to again read from the reports that I had quoted previously, different sections. First of all, from the IMF staff report that I would have read from June 2025. That would indicate that Barbados's debt continued to decline, Mr. President, in 2018, because it was suggested that our debt, Mr. President, was increasing again to those levels. When this government came in, the debt-to-GDP ratio was 158%, Mr. President. The debt-to-GDP ratio was 158% after 20 downgrades. After 20 downgrades. 2023, Mr. President, downgrades. Mr. President, this June 2025 report from the International Monetary Fund, debt to GDP continued to decline as growth and primary surpluses offset new borrowing. At the end of September 2025, total public sector debt to GDP measured 100.1%, a reduction of 2.9 percentage points. Mr. President, let me correct. I was actually reading, that one was actually taken from the Central Bank report. Central Bank report. 101%. Mr. President. The actual report from the IMF at that time in June put it at 111.5%. And Mr. President, it said, driven by robust growth and strong fiscal performance, it is expected, Mr. President, to continue declining, said that before, achieving, Mr. President, the 60% of GDP debt target by 2035 to 36. It will continue to decline, but we have brought debt down. When we came to office in 2018, 158%, to now trending downwards. Mr. President, the first time our debt was under 100% was what? Since 2012, Mr. President. And we are set. In this context of a global environment that is hostile, policy constraints, constraints on lending, to continue to drive down our debt profile, Mr. President. That is fact. That's not conjecture. That's not exaggeration. I've been deliberate, and I was deliberate in making sure that I brought evidence, not from my head, not what I feel, not what I believe, but what the fact states, Mr. President. One. Mr. President, you know, how we do development and the challenges that we face in terms of development, it's not going to be a sprint. It's not a sprint. I don't know any government anywhere in the world that has got all of its economic fundamentals, got all of its social fundamentals correct. What they do is to continue to be able to respond, Mr. President. And when you have come from a place where you have had excessive downgrades, when you have come at a place in which, as we heard from Senator Trim, in which you come from junk status, in which you all so had complete social decay. It is a process of rebuilding, so that an opposition party who presided over that decay, Mr. President, an opposition who in 2013 and 2014 undertook loans which circumscribed the ability of government to have any kind of space, and who could not even make the first payment of the Credit Suisse loan, and not only that as well, locked themselves into a loan facility that said the interest rate would increase after every downgrade, Mr. President. All of a sudden, the revelation of how investment and loans and how we should operate, we are now to accept that level of wisdom, Mr. President. Mr. President, I, like the Honorable Senator Kevin Boyce, noted, and I think the Honorable Senator Roshana Trim also mentioned, there are things that the government needs to be able to work on over time. There are things that we need to be able to continue to build out. But again, as the Honorable Leader of Government Business identified, there are things that we have started to be able to work on, Mr. President, But also, as I mentioned in my presentation, some of the benefits and some of the corrective measures that we now have to put in place will not be seen immediately. There will be long-term, Mr. President. What we are doing in education transformation is not an investment, Mr. President, that people will see now. It's an investment that you will see in the future. Mr. President, I don't even want to talk about the fact that just recently, the government has opened a new school. It's a new school, particularly for climate. It was opened in Bay Street. And I leave that there. Mr. President, I don't want to talk about, Mr. President, the investment that we are making as well in the healthcare system in order to be able to deal with the issues that we have at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. So we are not blind. The Queen Elizabeth Hospital under this government, and we can go back to the big book to see the evidence, from the previous administration to now, and we'll see an increased investment, almost $220 million annually, going to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, Mr. President. Plus, the government also recently a loan taken from the Saudis specifically to deal with building the infrastructure, doing repairs to over 9 polyclinics, Mr. President. Mr. President, we also just signed another agreement with the Chinese for further upgrades, Mr. President, and modernization for the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. That is investment that we are making. Mr. President, we don't want to talk as well, because we've heard that apparently this government does not take loans or do investment in people. That as well, the government is investing in urban renewal, Mr. President. And therefore, again, all of the blustering that we have heard in here, Mr. President. And again, and I want, Mr. President, to say that this is not to say, one, like I said previously, that there are not things that we need to be able to work on, that there are fundamental restructuring that we have to do within the public service to be able to deliver better. We have said it. Mr. President, we have said it. But we also note that we are working to be able to do it. The restructuring that is happening within the SOE reform, Mr. President, is one of those areas that we are working on to be able to better deliver it more efficiently, reduce government subsidies, and make sure that those agencies are commercially viable, Mr. President. Within the public sector as well, the restructuring that is going there, our Prime Minister talks about deconstruction and reconstruction, Mr. President, in order to ensure, again, enhanced delivery. Training that is happening. Mr. President, I can tell you that within the Barbados Water Authority, what we have found is that there are deficits in terms of human resource, and particularly some specific skilled human resource. And we have to be able to address those by making sure that we look far and wide for those. But that will take time as we then are able to deal with the day-to-day issues, Mr. President. Mr. President, I don't want as well us to forget, because we talked about the agricultural sector, the $2 million facility that the government made available for poultry farmers that was there. Mr. President, the fact that poultry farmers, not only poultry farmers, but the agricultural sector can access loans under the Enterprise Growth Fund as well. That is a facility for them to be, in order to be able to have financing. We heard that this does not exist and there's no facility for them as well. And Mr. President, I could spend a considerable amount of time going through the various programs that the government has had and put in place, but also as well acknowledging that there are some that need to be strengthened. The government is acutely aware that even as we say, and even as the facts identified, that we are now at the point of one of the lowest periods of unemployment. That we are not prepared to just say that. Because even as we have that fact, the government announced the launch of a job registry in order to make sure that we can have people, again, who are looking for work and be able to match them with where there is unemployment, Mr. President. We have and continue to expand Construction Gateway to strengthen the skills and training opportunities, particularly in key sectors where, again, we are seeing deficits, Mr. President. The investment that we are making in training in new technologies, because it is not just about jobs, but because we want to have quality jobs for people, Mr. President. And those are efforts that the government is making on an ongoing basis. But, Mr. President, I don't want to spend the time only in just responding, again, to some of those issues. But as the leader of government business in her presentation brought us back to the discussion on the bill, the reason for it, the purpose that it is that we're doing this. And I think, as I said, most of the reasonable, and even sometimes, Mr. President, not sometimes, in this case, the Honorable Senator Andre Worrell also as well, I believe, indicated that there's no problem with what the bill presents on its own and the government's attempt to make sure that we are expanding our ability to have that necessary fiscal space and the opportunities for the private sector and others in order to make sure that we can build the necessary resilience as well. The bill, Mr. President, as I said before, allows us to be able to become a full member through the purchase of those Series A shares in the bank. It provides for us to have access to almost 15% in terms of our ability to borrow from the balance sheet of CAF, which, Mr. President, stands at almost $63 billion, Mr. President, $63 billion, Mr. President. A bank that has been given a AAA rating from Standard & Poor's, which suggests, again, the level of fiscal prudence within the bank itself and stability. A bank, Mr. President, that is owned, again, by those members operating as critical shareholders, Mr. President, a bank that allows us, and through this, as Mr. President, as we move to pass this bill in this chamber, will then allow us to then also have a say in the policy framework of the bank. Mr. President, I beg that this bill be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg that you don't leave the chair and the Senate resolve.
Senator Dr. Morrow.
Mr. President, I beg to move that in the absence of our Deputy President, that Mr. Senator Lindell Nurse be appointed as Deputy President for the remainder of this sitting.
The question is that Senator the Honorable Lindell Nurse be appointed to position of Deputy President for the remainder of the sitting. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The ayes have it. Thank you very much, Senator Lewis, for agreeing to serve.
Mr. President, I beg to move that you don't leave the chair and the the chamber resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that you do not leave the chair and the Honorable the Senate resolve itself in the committee for further consideration of this bill. The honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Thanks, the ayes have it.
The Honorable the Senate is now in committee.
Mr. Chairman, maybe, it's a short bill, but maybe take it in two parts. Clauses 1 to 8.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that clauses 1 to 8 do now stand part.
The question is that clauses 1 to 8 do now stand part. Will all those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The first schedule.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill.
Question is that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill. Will all those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The second schedule.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill.
The question is that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill. Will all those honorable members in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The third schedule.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that the third schedule be the third schedule to the bill.
The question is that the third schedule be the third schedule to the bill. Will all those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Report.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do not report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. Will all those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Deputy President has reported the pass of one bill in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill now be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Latin American Development Bank Act 2025.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean Act 2025. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the sitting of the Senate be suspended for lunch and to resume at 3:40 this afternoon.
The question is that the Honorable Senate be now suspended until 3:40 p.m. today. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against please say no. The thanks the ayes have it. This sitting is suspended until 3:40 p.m. today.